Hi, thanks for tuning in to TV2 today. Here we are on the front porch of the Copeland Community Center with Front Porch Conversations. Our guest today is Millie Griswold. Millie, I'm so glad you could join us this morning. I have known you since I moved to the village, which is now a while, but and you've lived here even longer. But before we start about that, tell us where you were born and where you grew up. And
I was born on a small farm in western North Carolina in Catawba County, outside the town of Hickory. I stayed there until I was 18 years old and left for college. I have had five brothers and one sister. I was the youngest. In fact, there was 7 years between me and the brother next to me. So I always felt I was kind of an only child, but it was a good life. It really was.
what was the best thing about growing up?
Oh, I don't know. It was a quiet life. I had no playmates. So I adopted a dog and about 13 cats. The cats were, of course, barn cats, except a couple that Mama would let me bring to the porch. And I could sit there and rock them, and I claimed them as my baby dolls because I didn't have dolls as a child. But it was a good life.
And when you left to go to college, where did you go to college?
I just graduated from high school, was trying to decide what my future would hold, and I felt called, excuse me, to some type of ministry. So I decided to attend our Bible College of the Advent Christian Church in Brookline, Massachusetts. Now, I'm in North Carolina, and my mother wasn't so sure about that, nor my brothers, but I was determined that that was where I was supposed to go. So I left for college. It was an adventure. I had never been to a big city, especially a Yankee city, but it was a good experience. That was my first experience with college. And after my first year, I got my MRS degree because it was there that I met my husband, who was training for ministry. And we were married after the first year, went back to college, and I went to work to help support him through his last year of college. And then we headed out for our first church, a mission church, in Orlando, Florida. In fact...
So from one direction of the country to the...
Right. A new direction for my husband, who was from Worcester, Massachusetts. But it was fun.
And you actually met in college then?
We met in college, yes. I had met him prior to going to college because he came to Hickory, to our church, with a school group. And they had breakfast at our house. I was pouring coffee, and I overpoured the cup and splashed it. And he told me later, said that was the time that I really got him. It's like, what is it they say, if you put salt on a bird's tail, you can catch it? And he said, well, that was the time you caught me, but you didn't know it. And that's true, I did.
So that wasn't your reason for going to college there?
No, not really. But I was very happy to see him again.
I bet. And then there was an Advent Christian church in Orlando where he was called to.
It was a mission church. We were the first full-time minister. It was a good ministry. We didn't stay there too long. As soon as things kind of stabilized, my husband moved on to another church. He was one of those ministers who enjoyed serving in mission churches and troubled churches. And all of our churches were that kind of church. So once the church stabilized and was ready for another pastor, we were on our way.
And at what point did you, I know you have children, so when did they?
Okay, we were pastoring in Charlotte, North Carolina, and both of our girls were born there. And I was a stay-at-home mom for a few years and enjoyed it. And I'm glad that I had that privilege. Mm-hmm. That was good. So that's where our girls were born. From there, we went to Plainville, Connecticut. So here we've been in Florida, North Carolina, Connecticut. And the Connecticut pastorate was, again, a good pastorate. When we went there, the minister, the regional superintendent, who placed us there, said, now, you're the final pastor. If this church doesn't make it now, we're closing the church. Well, we got to work. And before we left, the church that was in downtown Plainville moved to a new community outside the town, built a new parsonage and a new church, and then my husband was ready to move on. Mm-hmm. So we went to Detroit, Michigan. Actually, Centerline, Michigan, which is over the border from Detroit. And it was there that Millie got to start her education once again. I had
and
registered.
How old were your girls by then?
Pardon?
How old were your girls by
then? The
then?
girls were in elementary school, and the school was close to the house. Mm-hmm. I had been taking from what was then Berkshire Christian College some correspondence courses. And at this point, I was able to enroll in Detroit Bible College, now called William Tyndale College. And I had, let me back up, okay?
Got it.
I started in Connecticut to what is now a branch of the University of Connecticut. And I was getting pretty well set into that. I was studying education, and we made the move. So I enrolled in William Tyndale, and I told my husband, I said, if you don't stop moving, I am never going to get my education. I had just about gotten all the credits I needed at Detroit Bible College when we moved back to Charlotte, North Carolina. So I had Berkshire Christian evaluate my courses, determine what I needed to transfer everything back to Berkshire. I had enough hours, but I didn't have some of the right courses. So they said, okay, you need such and such for a degree in theology with an emphasis in Christian education. So I enrolled in the local community college, got those courses. The couple of theology courses I needed, I once again took them by correspondence from Berkshire. And lo and behold, I finally graduated from Berkshire Christian College.
Through a lot of stops along the way.
I had a lot of stops, but you know, looking back, I don't regret it because I had a very broad education, a good education. And later, I decided to get my master's, and I got that while I was working at denominational offices. And I got that from Luther Rice Seminary. Again, an off-campus program that was certainly a new way of education for me. But it was a good education because some of the courses I could relate to my work at denominational offices. So I could have a project that would complement what I was doing in the office. And then I could use the results of that among the churches of the denomination.
That's great.
So it worked great.
And you stayed in Charlotte then for a while?
Yes, we moved to Charlotte when Roland became director of youth ministry at denominational offices. The girls were in high school, so Mama went to work so we could buy a home. And I taught for 4 years at Charlotte Christian School, 6th grade, some of the hardest work I've ever done in my life because it was a self-contained classroom. I taught everything. We even taught recess and lunch. But here again, it was a good experience. And from there, I went into the national office as director of Christian education. I was there for 24 years.
And you didn't move at all during that time?
We didn't move. We didn't get our house paid for either, but we at least were living in our first owned home. And the girls graduated from high school there and went on to college.
As far as working for the denomination,
Yes.
what was your favorite part about that?
Ooh, I enjoyed it all. That was really an excellent job. One of my big responsibilities was curriculum, Sunday school curriculum. I had editors on the field who edited all levels, and then I wrote curriculum in addition to that. Special courses for adults, and I initiated several courses that were written by people outside the office, and I would write the leader's guide. So curriculum, and I guess another program was one where I trained volunteers to conduct workshops in the local church. Overall, I probably had 60 or 70 people scattered across the denomination, which is the United States and Canada. And we had good times. I would write the curriculum for them.
Mm-hmm.
And they initially met and learned the process of conducting workshops. And I did some of the publicity for getting them into churches. But it was a good program, very good, called Christian Education Trainers.
You were training the trainers.
I trained the trainers.
I think
In fact,
that's a great
what I
concept.
call the training sessions. I would go into a region and we'd have a training trainers program for a week, and then off they were.
Mm-hmm. A good use of everybody's resources, I think, doing it that
Yeah.
way.
It was very good.
And when did you you and your husband think about coming to the village? Or what caused you to think of
What
that?
caused me to come to the village? Well, ever since I was born, I knew about Advent Christian Village. It was the Advent Christian Home then. My mother and my granny were big prayer supporters. They didn't have a lot of money to support, but they were big prayer supporters and promoters of the Advent Christian Home. So I always knew about it. And we got in our home 2 publications, the local newspaper and the Present Truth Messenger. That was a denominational publication, published, by the way, in Live Oak by Dr. Bixler. And on the back of that publication, that was a weekly, there was always the Old Folks at Home column. And my parents read that so they would know what was happening at the Advent Christian Home.
Was that a little bit like our current Friendly Neighbor News, or was it written by staff?
Oh, it was written by staff. It covered news. Oh, excuse me, the Old Folks at Home column. Yes, that was written by a staff person. In fact, it was interesting. The lady who started that moved to the home. Her doctors had told her that she had a couple of years to live and she needed to get in a warmer climate. So she came here. And lo and behold, she started this page, and she lived about 20 years longer. And then Anna Hart, who was an employee of Mr. M.A., took it over. So it's fun for me in the archive to read those pages because it brings back a lot of memories of my parents reading that page.
I bet.
I think I got sidetracked from your question.
Well, what made you decide or think about coming in when?
Okay, I've been here 23 years. About 40 years ago, my husband and I bought 2 lots in Butterfield Acres, and it was our intent to retire here. Well, lo and behold, he up and died before we could retire. It was 1997. And one day the village called me, Rosemary Humbles, and said, would you consider coming to the village? We want to establish an office of communications. Well, I was lost after my husband died. Our home and our yard was more than I could care for. I was ready for a move. So I interviewed and I was hired. So I came here in 1997 and established the office of Director of Communication, which was, I knew nothing about it, what I was to do, but it was right up my alley, and again, I loved it. In fact, I told Mr. Humbles recently, said, you may not have known it, but you and Rosemary saved my life when you invited me to come to the village. And I sold 1 lot in Butterfield Acres. I gave the other lot to my daughter, one of them, because after I lived on campus for a year, I realized that a single woman needs to be on campus for the benefits, for being with people. So I bought the little home I'm in and love it.
And you do a great job of keeping your yard there. You spend more time in your yard. It's amazing.
I do. Gardening is one of my joys. Getting to where I just about can't do it, but I still enjoy it. And so it's been a good experience. I retired from my position as Director of Communications when I was 70 years old. And I've been busy ever since.
And for our viewers who don't know, one of the things that keeps you really busy, would you talk about that?
Oh, yes. While I was Director of Communications, I established as part of that the office of the Village Archive. And then when I retired, I continued working in that area as a volunteer. I volunteer 15 to 20 hours a week in the archive. I like history. This place has a remarkable history, and I enjoy learning about it and telling others of it.
And you do a great job of that, Millie. Thank you.
Well, it's most enjoyable.
I know you've also been involved in the community of Live Oak as well, and in the Historical Society, is that?
Right. I served for 10 years on the Suwannee County Historical Commission, and that was helpful. I joined the Altrusa Club when I came here, and that gave me 2 things. Good contacts in my position with the village, but also I met a lot of wonderful women who served the community, and it's a great organization.
And I want to thank you personally for introducing me to Altrusa and sponsoring me to be a member of Altrusa.
Oh, well, I'm glad you could.
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate it. Along with being involved with the Historical Society, you helped publish a couple of things there?
Yes, I worked with my good friend Betsy Birch in co-writing and publishing the 2000th anniversary of the country.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
No. Well, yeah,
Anyway,
I guess it would have been,
it
yes.
was in celebration. We published a book called Echoes of the Past. It was a history of Suwannee County. I love that because once again, I got to learn about history. My kids say to me, Mom, you know more about Suwannee County than you do Catawba County. I said, well, yes. I've lived here longer than I lived in Catawba County.
Right.
And I had occasion to learn in publishing the book. And when I was with the commission, Suwannee County Commission, I did a couple of brochures for them. Okay?
And I know you've been active in helping do things that benefited the village. You were very active in supporting the library coming to the village. And
yes, that was enjoyable. The library, the rescue service. Anytime Craig Carter wanted somebody to do a petition, he came to Millie. And I worked the community with petitions as well as the village. And yeah, it was just one little bit of getting those facilities here. But every time I see that ambulance go out from the archives door, I say, thank you, Lord.
absolutely.
Yes.
When you recently wrote something for the Friendly Neighbor News about what you were doing in quarantine times, and I was encouraged by the fact that something that had been on your list of things to do for a long time was underway. Gave me hope that maybe I'll get to some of the ones on mine. You
Oh,
want
I
to
hope
share
so.
about that?
Oh, even after I left denominational offices and the village working, I still continued to make an annual list of goals. But when I retired, it stretched out to a 5-year list of goals. And one of those things was to do a family cookbook. And that's what I've been doing as we've been quarantined here. I've asked my children and grandchildren to submit a recipe or two. I have some from my mother and my grandmother, and it'll be a 5-generation cookbook. I give a little history of some of the recipes of my mother and my grandmother. One thing I did was write a 1-page of how to catch, kill, and dress a chicken. And when my kids read this, I think they'll be grossed out. But that's the way we did it.
Well, when I read that, because you mentioned that in the article, I thought, I had not thought about this in years. My mother, I cannot imagine her doing it, but I either know it from memory or being told or actually remembering it. Seeing her catch a chicken, wring its neck, chop its head off, and I can't remember anything about plucking feathers, but of all the things I think about my mother, that's one I'm just amazed that she did. But I guess when you're hungry or when the need, you know.
Well, you do it. That was
That's right.
the only way we had to do it. And I never got into that because by the time I was a wife and mother, I could buy a dressed chicken or an undressed chicken, I guess we should call it. One of my tasks as a kid was feeding the chickens and gathering the eggs. And I had several. Everybody in the family had their set of tasks they had to do. But chickens was one of mine. And the hens I enjoyed. The roosters, I did not. There was one old rooster. I mean, we're talking about a kid who's 6 years old. And this guy loved to chase me. And anytime I would stoop down to play with dirt and make mud pies or something, he would come and try to flog me. And I would run away. One day I was running from him. I fell and hit my head on a cast iron stove. And I still have right here the scar to show for it. In fact, hair will not grow in that scar. And my mother had had it. She said, I'll fix him. Well, she caught him. And I couldn't watch the process at this point. And she made chicken and dumplings. Now, chicken and dumplings is one of my favorite meals. But I could not, at supper that night, eat chicken and dumplings because I felt I had been the cause of the rooster's death. And you know, a rooster is very important to a chicken business, which is what my mother had. And but the rest of the family enjoyed them.
Good. Millie, I know that you grew up in an Advent Christian church. Was there a particular moment that you knew that you were a person of faith and where that was going to lead you? Or not even that, but another special memory?
Yes, was rather young, but I was a sincere, shy person. Believe it or not, I was shy. And I had a teacher, Sunday school teacher, that I admired. And she apparently realized that I was ready to accept the Lord as my Savior. She kept me after class one Sunday, and that's when I came to know Jesus as my Savior. I was 9 years old. And I was very sincere in my faith from that time forward. And I mentioned earlier, when I was 18 is when I felt called to some type of Christian ministry. I didn't know where it would lead. But that teacher and my mother and a minister's wife were all my models for the Christian life.
That's a wonderful foundation.
It was. It really was. But growing up and living in the country, all I knew was family and church. If the church doors open, we were there. So that was my background. I wish all children could enjoy that.
Yes. When you were talking about your list of goals, would you share a couple more with us?
My goals for now? Jeepers. I've kind of forgotten that. My goals have changed as I've aged. One of my goals was to continue doing a good bit of travel. That goal has lessened. When my grandchildren graduated from high school, I took each of them to a country in Europe that was their choice. And I really enjoyed traveling Europe and here in the States. But that goal has kind of gone by the way. I need to update my biography. When I retired at 70, that was the first thing I did. Well, that was 10 years ago. It was longer than that, so I need to update that. When I retire from the archive, I'm not sure what that next goal will be. It'll be volunteering somewhere on campus, but I don't know where. And as I said in my biography, our lives were lives well lived, and I hope that when my death comes, it can be fast and sure, and I'll still be trusting the Lord. I expect to be. Okay? You know, at 85, you have to say, I've said I want to live to 100, but I only want to live to 100 if I have good health. If not, Lord, take me.
And I think as the longer I live, the more I get to be feeling that same way too.
Yeah.
You know? What is your favorite story about the history of the village? Do you have a favorite story?
Story about the village?
The history of the village.
Ooh, I hadn't thought of that. I enjoy the early history of the village and the story of the children who had an opportunity to live here. I have some pictures in the archive. Within 4 or 5 years of the founding of the home and orphanage at that time, I have a picture of 65 children that were here.
Wow.
And it started out basically as an orphanage, but within 2 years there was older people began to arrive. And those children, I can visualize a story of many of them, all ages, but there's one row of little boys on the porch, and I mean they are tough. You can tell. Barefoot, hand-me-down clothes, and in some of my reading, their joy was swimming naked in the river, catching raccoons, skinning them, and selling the skins for hats. And they'd catch squirrels and rabbits and had a wonderful time doing that. But they could go out in the woods here and be gone half a day, as long as they were back by the time they were told to be back for a meal. So I enjoyed that part. But it's interesting that we still have a children's program in 2020.
Yes, it is. And I think it really says a lot for the village of how we've adapted over time to meet the needs of the times.
That's right. Exactly. But it's a wonderful place to live. And I wouldn't be anywhere else because as I age or my physical situation changes, there's a place here for me at all levels. We have a comprehensive care community.
We do.
And I highly recommend it. I really do.
And I would emphasize community and care as a part of that.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean, it is a community. It's not just a place to live.
Oh, that's right, yes.
And
one of my joys is the friendships I have here. Friends from the past and new friends that I've made. One thing that surprised me about the village was the variety of people, the backgrounds of people from all walks of life. You're cared for here.
Right.
And we have some very, very talented people who live here.
Yes, we do.
And they continue to contribute their time to the village.
And the village is all the better for it.
That's right. That's right.
Well, Millie, thank you so much for sitting down here on the porch, and I've enjoyed rocking with you as well as talking with you.
Well, thank you.
And we thank the birds for their little concert in the background. Thanks for tuning in to TV2, and we look forward to being here with you on another Front Porch Conversation.